3-5-0-FUM. Greetings, seekers of all kinds, those who are in your first act of life or your second act of life. Wherever you're coming from, you're welcome here to my backyard. Only, call first. I'm Rabbi John Carrier, your friendly neighborhood rabbi. I wasn't going to teach anything today because today, you can tell by my clothing, is my day off. Most of the time, I'm like Peter Griffin. I wear the same thing every day. I'm like a cartoon dad. White shirts, blue jeans, cowboy boots, keep it simple. It's like one less decision I have to make in the morning. Well, it's my day off and I just grab a t-shirt, most of which are also the same color. But I'm making this video anyway because I had to capture something that happened over the weekend that I want to share with you. If you're looking for Jewish learning online and looking for a rabbi to talk about this week's Parsha, this week's Torah portion, what we're reading in the fixed lectionary of the Jewish cycle, I don't do a lot of those, simply because I'd rather connect with you in a way that maybe wherever you are, regardless of what week it is. A lot of people find my videos through search. P.S. If people are searching for this week's Parsha, they already have quite a bit of Jewish knowledge to begin with, and I don't want to make that assumption as a barrier between you and me learning together. However, this past week's Parsha was very powerful for me in the context of the learning that I did with my community. And I say learning, not just teaching, because while I did do some teaching, as often happens, I think I wound up learning a lot more from the people that I was nominally teaching. There go those sarcasm rabbits again. And the story we read last week was about spies. Specifically, when the Hebrew people left Egypt, having been rescued by God from Pharaoh with the help of a guy named Moses, they started marching through the wilderness to get to this place that we call the Promised Land, right? This is the land that God promised to Abraham and to Abraham's descendants, including those multitudinous descendants that left Egypt. So they're basically trying to get back home to a place that none of them had been to before. And they'd heard all sorts of great things about this place. It's a land flowing with milk and honey, and who doesn't like that stuff unless you're lactose intolerant or allergic to bees, which today a surprising number of Jewish people are. Irony! But that's not important right now. So they get to this place, they get to the very edge of this land, and the only thing between them and this land is the River Jordan. And so we're gonna go over there, but first, let's be smart about this. Let's pick a scout from each of the 12 tribes and send those scouts over to get the lay of the land, see if it really is as nice as everybody said, see who's already there that we might have to negotiate with, go to war with, etc., and come back and report. And they did. And so these 12 scouts, these 12 spies, went to check this out. And they said, dude, I slipped in a puddle of milk and honey like as soon as I got there. All that stuff is true. Not only that, but they have giant fruit. They have grapes the size of grapefruit. That's probably why they call it grapefruit. And everything's magnificent, except guess who eats giant fruit? Giants do. 3-5-0-FUM. So most of the spies were like, yeah, it sounds nice and all, and it's everything that God said it was, and there might be giants. Whistling in the dark. Whistling in the dark. So 10 of the spies were like, no go on this. Let's just, we'll find another place, we'll settle right here, it's gonna be fine, we can get other milk and honey. So that was 10 spies. 2 of the spies were like, yes, we saw everything that these other 10 spies did, but we got this, right? God said this was our land. Yes, it's scary, but, a promise is a promise, so let's give it a shot. And so they took a vote. In proper democratic fashion, they voted on whether they were going to go in or not. 10 spies said no, 2 spies said yes. And so the people who had been freed from Egypt walked all the way to get here, got spooked, and said, never mind. Long story short, God says, okay, whether you think you can take this land or not, you're right. If you think you can, you can. And if you think you can't, you can't. God realized that this people who came out of a lifetime of generations of slavery still had this mindset of slavishness and fear. Maybe these weren't the people to inhabit the land. And so God said, okay, keep walking. You're gonna walk for a total of 40 years until everyone who was an adult, everyone who was 20 years old and up when they left Egypt has passed away in the desert. And then only those people who were children at the time, or under 20, will be allowed to enter this land, because while they spent their childhood in slavery, they hadn't yet been solidified in this idea of what we can and can't do. So basically gave the people who sided with fear a life sentence of wandering and of not knowing what the promised land could be like. I'm in a Jewish community that's been around for about 70 years now, and that means the community's seen lots of ups and downs. It's going through the same crises and changes that every synagogue and indeed every kind of mainline religious organization is right now. There's a lot of challenges ahead of us, but there's a lot of promise on the other side of those challenges. So I posed the question, what's our promise? And what are our giants? And then I dug a little deeper. When you look at different stories in the Torah, if you go back to Genesis and forward to Deuteronomy, and then back to Genesis, and in the context of this story in the book of Numbers, you can discern that these giants, they're called Bnei Anak, or the Anakites, were thought by the Hebrew people to be descendants of the Nephilim. The Nephilim is this race of gigantic, powerful people that's mentioned very briefly in the book of Genesis. It says, after Adam and Eve had kids, they had lots of daughters, and people began to prosper on the earth, and heavenly beings thought that these daughters were attractive and came down and made families with them. And the offspring of human women and divine beings were these giant, powerful creatures. So I asked the people in the room on Shabbat morning, and I tell you, if you're ever going to services on Shabbat looking for a good sermon, don't come to my synagogue, because I rarely do sermons. Instead, what I prefer to do is take these texts and take these ideas and hand them over to the people in the room for an active, open discussion of what these things mean. And thank God I do, because the most amazing insight came out of this. The question that I posed was, if the prosperity that lies before us in our vision is promised by God, what does it mean that the giants that stand in our way are also divine beings? That is, the promise comes from God and the obstacles to the promise come from God, right? That realization blew my mind on one level, but then this wonderful person named Mickey in my congregation said, hold the phone, Rabbi. Take that phone, hold it. These giants you speak of aren't just divine beings. If it was as simple as that, no worries, because we're descendants of Jacob, and Jacob wrestled with this divine being in the book of Genesis and got a new name, and his new name was Yisrael, which means one who struggles with beings divine and human and prevails. So we have that in our family heritage, that we can struggle with divine beings. We can take a promise that comes from God, we can take the obstacles that also come from God, and synthesize that in a way that we fulfill that promise. Maybe God gives us those obstacles so that we can grow into the people that we need to be to achieve those results. But Mickey said, wait a minute, those obstacles aren't just divine. Like the story says, those giants come from the combination of divine beings and our human mothers. Those giants aren't just divine, they're us. And what does that mean to strive for an objective, to strive for the fulfillment of a promise, those things we desire most, if the beings or ideas that stand in our way aren't just from God, but from our own family? And this is why I love teaching Torah in conversation, because I always learn at least as much as I teach. Because as I'm striving for change and pushing for change and leading for change within my community and encourage other people to lead for change, we have to realize the whole way that whatever is opposed to change is also from God. And those people that we may be tempted to make monsters out of because we think they're in our way are also our family. And the pain that they feel in the process of change isn't the abstract suffering of some distant person. It's the suffering of our own mothers. It's the suffering of our own family members. That has to be comforted. That has to be honored. That has to have room made for mourning of what is lost as you try to gain a higher goal that you may all agree on. And so the number one takeaway from all of this is that as you are attempting to grow, as you're attempting to change something in your life, as you're attempting to reach some objective, and these obstacles pop up in your way, because the obstacles themselves are also of the same source as the promise, and also intimately and familially connected to you, we can no longer make monsters out of our giants. We can't make a caricature of the so-called opposition. Yes, we should strive. Yes, we're promised this land. And if we don't strive, we're given a life sentence of wondering what might have been possible. So we have to move forward. But in moving forward, we have to appreciate our obstacles as being there for our growth. Those things we have to overcome aren't just inconveniences, they're just as holy as what we're trying to get to. And P.S., they should be regarded as sacred to us as our own mothers and fathers, even as we disagree, even as we try to grow together. And while I don't normally talk about the week's Torah reading, while I don't normally try to teach on my day off, I thought this was too important. I wanted to make sure I shared this with you. I would love to hear your thoughts on this. The comment section for wherever you're seeing this video is the perfect place for that. So I'm gonna give you a little homework. In the comments below, what I'd like you to do is describe your promised land. What's some goal that you've been trying to achieve? What's something that you think you deserve or are entitled to based on promises in your life, based on your perception of what is right and just? What's your promised land? And what are your giants? Or who are your giants? What or who is standing in your way? So I want to hear your promised land. I want to hear your giants. And if you're brave, I also want to hear you say how those giants are also you, how those giants are connected to you, how those giants are just as holy as the goal that you're after. If you could do that for me, I'd love to spark this conversation and continue this for as long as we can. As always, thanks for watching this video, Seeker. If you like these videos, please give it a thumbs up and most definitely hit the subscribe button so that every time I make a video, you can automatically get news about that and we can continue learning and growing and fighting giants and loving our giants together. Until next time, Seeker, Shalom.